Good morning and welcome back to the Moms Like Me podcast powered by Support Now. I'm joined today by Brittany Anderson, whose story inspired me for multiple reasons. One, we came about meeting each other because of the great work that they do with providing grants and support with children with a disability. And then I learned while meeting her and learning more about her incredible nonprofit, more about her own story and her own journey. And so the first question I asked Brittany was not, how do we work together, Support Now and her nonprofit, but rather, how do I get you on the podcast to learn more about your own story and what drove you and inspired you to do the great work that you do? So Brittany, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So I know that your kind of journey began with your experience with your youngest son, Bennett, but I'd love for you to share a little bit more about how his condition was cerebral palsy, kind of how that all came about, how you learned about it, and kind of what transpired for you as a mom. And then we'll certainly weave in towards the end of kind of what then kind of took you to building this awesome organization.
Sure. Yeah. So I have two boys. My older one is going to be 11 soon. My younger one is just turned 9. That's Bennett. Bennett was born with congenital CMV. So I had a CMV infection in my first trimester of pregnancy. If you don't know what CMV is, I urge you to please go look it up. It is a very common virus that we often have all been exposed to, but can be very problematic in the first trimester of pregnancy if you haven't ever had it before. I happen to be a nurse, so I probably got it while I was working. I also had a toddler at the time, so it's transmitted mostly via saliva and urine. But at any rate, I got that while I was pregnant. So we knew in utero that he may or may not have some issues. I went through my entire pregnancy very closely monitored by maternal and fetal medicine, had a lot of appointments, a lot of follow-up, and a lot of support. Ultimately, Bennett was born around 34 weeks because he started to show some concerns on my non-stress test that I was having every other day. So he was born premature. We knew pretty quickly that he was going to have some neurologic issues just based on his MRI around birth and the care that he required while he was in the NICU. So, but as with many things, it's just kind of a wait and see game. You don't know until you know. We don't know a lot about the brain and how it regenerates. So we've just been kind of riding a roller coaster ever since then.
Brittany, I'm so curious, how did your experience as a nurse impact how you processed even anticipating his arrival and his birth? What was that like for you? Because you're clearly well informed on what this could be.
Yeah.
You're also the mom and trying to, probably keep your head on straight. So I would love to learn a little bit more what was going through your mind in your pregnancy.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a blessing and a curse to know so much about medicine and about healthcare. It's a blessing because I can navigate the healthcare system very easily because I have the knowledge to be able to ask the questions that I should be able to ask. It's a curse because sometimes it will send you down a rabbit hole of, the worst case scenario. I was an ER and trauma nurse at the time, so I was used to seeing a lot of very scary things. So, like I said, in some aspects it's great. In some aspects it can be very daunting to have all of this information available to me and just kind of have to be like everyone else and sit there and say, well, we're just going to wait and see, and just make the most informed decisions that we could.
Yeah. Have you found that this experience impacted the way you worked with families, in the how did your personal experience impact you professionally and
Yeah.
in those situations, or was it unchanged?
No, 100%. A huge impact to how I practice now. I do mostly quality and safety work now, so I'm away from the bedside, but I do a lot of work in the equity space and helping to make healthcare more accessible to all people. It definitely made an impact on me because, up until this point, I went to the primary care doctor once a year. My family was very healthy. No real intricate interactions within the healthcare setting, outside of my job as a nurse. And I very quickly saw how difficult it is to navigate the healthcare system. And that's coming from someone that has intimate knowledge of it. So I just found myself always thinking back, how do people that don't know these things even navigate half of this? Like, how do they even know where to start? Because it's so intricate and oftentimes quite convoluted. So it gave me a very different perspective on how people navigate this and how challenging it is to navigate it as an educated person, let alone someone whom, doesn't have a lot of experience in the healthcare system.
So I want to stay here for a second because I think you're right. It's something, and it's a common theme I hear on this podcast and even just speaking with families, that people are so overwhelmed with the amount of information. They don't know how the systems work. And yeah, at the end of the day, especially as moms, we're most concerned with just, is my baby going to be okay? Is my child going to be okay? But
No.
how you arrive at how you arrive at answers like that depends, right? And it depends on how you ask questions.
No.
So I want to ask you like a very specific question. Like, what advice do you have for parents? At a minimum, like, what sort of questions should they be asking of their doctors and nursing team if they were to get this warning, which you did, which is that
Yep.
this because of the CMV that you've been exposed to? Like, what are the next steps that, as a mom, they should be taking? Like, questions that they can feel empowered to be asking? Because like I 1,000% agree that people want to do what's best, but they are so it's so chaotic for them. They don't even know how to process it, and so therefore, I think there's missed opportunity in
Yeah.
getting the information they need to put their best foot forward.
Yeah, I would love to give a straight answer to that, but I think it's probably quite gray. I will say that one thing for me was leaning into you don't have to have all the answers right now, and you're going to make the best decision with the information that is available to you in this moment.
Mm.
And that's where I think asking some of those more pointed questions are, what is the risk versus benefit of what we're about to do? What is the likelihood that we're going to have this outcome versus this outcome? It's very rare that someone will answer the question, what would you do if you were in my situation? That happened to us. I wanted to know what people would do, and no one would give me a straight answer. So I just kind of my husband and I had to do the best we could with the information that we had available to us.
Mm.
But don't be afraid to ask a lot of questions. That's their job. Their job is to answer your questions fully. Make sure you feel informed when you're making decisions for the moment. When we're thinking about things that are later in the future, I have learned to settle in a little bit of discomfort that I don't always know what the future looks like. And I think if we can settle into that a little bit more sometimes, I think, especially in the disability community, some parents will find a little bit more peace that things will work out the way that they're supposed to, and you don't have to constantly be worried about what's gonna happen 10 years down the line or 5 years down the line. I recognize that I have a lot of privilege in that I can have a lot of anticipation for what comes down the line because I have knowledge of healthcare and how it works and what's likely to happen in disease progression and things like that. But I think my biggest takeaway from all of this is try a little less to control the future and try a little more to just work with what I have right now, and let's focus on the one thing I have right now, and that's gonna get us to the next step that we need to be in.
I think that is so profound, Brittany, and I think it applies specifically to families with a child with a disability. And isn't that great advice in general? Like, just for parenting, we tend to, like, we are so quick to move on to the next worry, the next concern, and what's gonna happen this year, next year, even with totally normal, able-bodied
Mhm.
babies and humans,
Yeah,
and
sure.
we tend to, like, project what we see or any, like, flaws that we see in our children. It's like, "Well, how is this gonna manifest in 5 years, in 10 years, as an adult, as when they're a parent?" And in that worry, you
You're
forget to just be
making
grateful for the moment that you're in, and isn't that like I just felt like you
Isn't
just
that
gave,
what
like,
we
some really
all
great parenting
aspire?
advice, like,
Yeah.
just solve the problem that you have today,
Yep.
enjoy that whatever that is, because we don't get to know what's gonna happen next for anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you navigate all of this with an older child as well? Was this explained to them? Like, what was your approach?
Yeah, great question. This is something that I think I still struggle with as a parent.
Yeah.
It's It's ebbed and flowed, over the years. Beau was only 20 months old when I had Bennett, so
Mhm.
he was still very young, he didn't quite understand. It wasn't until he had more awareness that his brother didn't interact with him in the way that his friends' brothers interacted with them, that we started to get more questions and things like that. We have always been very, like, open and honest with Beau about Bennett, and I will just give him a little plug, he's his best advocate. One thing that I love about him is that he does not shy away from talking about his brother at all. Sorry, I always get emotional talking about this. 'Cause I'm just so proud of him. Like, people will, like, be like, "Shh, I'll tell you later, like, we'll talk about it later," and Beau will be the first one to be like, "No, we'll talk about it now." He has a disability, and he has CP, and he'll tell you all about it. So, with that regard, like, he's a great advocate. With regard to their dynamic, it can be challenging a little bit because
Mhm.
his little brother doesn't interact with him in the way he sees other little brothers interact with older brothers in the world. But with that, the older he gets, I think the more he understands, he's a person, he has a personality, he's, great just as he is. It looks a little bit different.
Right.
You know, of course, sometimes he has moments where he's like, "Man, I wish my brother didn't have a disability, but I still love him." He always like proceeds it with that. I think it's challenging. It's just it's different dynamics with different families,
Right.
you know?
Right.
It's and I think too, it probably changes depending on, like, what your trajectory was. Was your outcome expected, or was it something that was acquired? This has been his whole life for as long as he can remember. He doesn't remember life before Bennett. So, in that regard, I do think it's a little bit easy for us probably.
Yeah, I think it's different for you because you've the entire, like, foundation of your life has basically been centered around Bennett's you've created an environment for Bennett to thrive, and therefore that's what Bo knows, and there and it probably makes it easier for him to come to terms with versus something more sudden where now your lifestyle is changing as a result
Yeah.
of this incident. I also I I'm so fascinated by children in this regard, and I think you're kind of just, like, speaking to this. Children have such an amazing way of talking and expressing in ways that I feel
Mhm.
as adults we could learn a lot from.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, don't you wish sometimes that your adult friends would ask questions and inquire and talk to you directly? Or maybe not, like, I'm
No,
curious,
I
like
do. I absolutely do. I think it's funny. I always say this to him too. Like, he doesn't, when we're like out and about in the world, he doesn't really like placate to him, which I love because I don't want people to, come up to him and talk to Bennett like he's a baby. Like, he very much understands what you're saying, and I think Bo's like a very good advocate for that too, even to my husband and I sometimes when we're like, "What are we gonna get him for his birthday?" And we'll say something out loud and Bill will be like, "He can hear you. He knows what you're saying. If that's supposed to be a secret, you shouldn't be so he keeps us all in check. He's
well,
probably
he's, like, levels everybody up.
Yeah, he level
It's
sets
like,
for
"Hey,
everybody.
reminder, he's
Yeah.
here and he has opinions, and even though he may
Yeah.
be non-speaking, like, let's remember that he still has opinions."
Yeah. I think one thing that's been really important for us too is reminding him that Bennett is not his responsibility.
Mm,
I don't want him to think that he has to care for him when he's older or, he's gonna become his responsibility when his dad and I aren't around anymore. And of course, I would love if he would always care for him, but I don't want him to have that expectation because I don't want him to carry that with him his whole
right.
life. He didn't ask for this. Of course he loves his brother, but I feel like that's a lot to put on him at the age of 11 to say this is what your life is gonna look like.
Yeah.
So, we try very hard to remind him of that when we can, and, he slowly takes interest in learning to do things. Like, sometimes he'll ask me, "Well, can you show me how to put his shoes on? Because 'Cause I'm gonna need to know how to do that." And, things like that, which is super sweet, but we just let him, like, take it as it comes,
Well, he sounds like a bit of an old soul, like a
He
nurturer.
is an
Like,
old
so this is
soul.
just naturally who
Yeah.
he is, and so,
Mhm.
even if Bennett didn't have a disability, it sounds like he would be a
Probably be like that.
protector regardless, right?
Yeah. He
And it sounds like you and your husband have done such a good job of letting Bo figure out how he wants to interact and not pushing him to interact. And I think that's also so important where you can't want a certain relationship for your kids. They kind of have to figure it out on their own. And ultimately, like you can nurture like what's natural for them and
Mhm.
guide them from there, which I think is a really just, again, a beautiful reminder of yes, everything is different than probably you anticipated. And you still get to parent in the sense that you're taking his lead.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really I love watching their relationship. I love watching, sometimes it's like a wrestling match in my living room, and sometimes they're mad at each other just like regular siblings and they drive each other crazy, but, it's just a different dynamic. It's not, you know, I it's just a it's just different.
It's just different. I know what's also different for you is, again, you as you alluded to, like, you're kind of like this was not something you didn't come from the world of disability. You didn't come from, you talked about your experience as a nurse, so certainly you understand trauma and emergency and all of these things. From everything I've gathered from you, though, the world of accessibility wasn't something that was kind of on the forefront of your mind prior to having Bennett.
Mm.
So kind of like talk me through what changed in your mind as you've seen Bennett develop and the opportunity that you saw not just for your son but for others.
Yeah, that's a great question. I am embarrassed to say how much I just did not, or how much I took for granted how inaccessible the world was until I had a child with a disability. And then it is like fireworks, light bulbs, all of the things. And I'm like, why is that like that? Like, why is this thing, so inaccessible to so many people? I am the biggest advocate now for just universal accessibility and universal design. I try and think about it in all of the things that I do.
Mm.
The world is largely not made for people with disabilities and people who do not move about the world in a,
Mm.
quote unquote typical or normal fashion. It's been challenging and it's been an eye opener for sure. I wish I would have had more awareness of it at different points in my life, but now that I have awareness of it, I'm very quick to, be mindful of it or share opportunities with people when they become available, even things like that door should have an automatic opener on it, or, your button that opens the bathroom stall, that's not in a good place, like just having those conversations with people, not that they may or might not do anything with it, but if they don't know, they don't know, and we have to share. So,
Well, and it's like ignorance is bliss.
yes.
I
Yeah,
think for so many
absolutely.
people, they just don't think about it because they don't have to think
You
about
don't
it.
have to. Yeah.
And then for you, you begin to have to think about it, and then it becomes, okay, well, what do I actually do about this? So I'd
Um,
love to, you know, e everything that, again, from our previous conversations I've learned is that, Bennett has, had to use a number of different, like, specialized equipment from walkers to adaptive bikes and strollers because for you, making it possible for him to be a kid without having to think about it is important.
yeah, absolutely.
And instead of just focusing on your own family, you've really driven an initiative to drive this accessibility to other families that might have a child with CP. So tell me more about and tell our audience more about Wolf Pups on Wheels, and again, what you're trying to do in an effort to help more families that are experiencing what you do.
Sure, absolutely. So, Wolf Pups on Wheels is a nonprofit startup we launched in July of this year. Our goal is to provide small grants to families for adaptive equipment, bikes, mobility equipment, augmented communication, intensive therapies, stuff that's not often covered by insurance. I mean, even things like orthotics, aren't my
Right.
insurance doesn't cover orthotics. I pay for them all out of pocket and they are expensive.
Mhm.
My husband and I have always found ourselves in this kind of land of like, man, if we only had an extra $1,000 to take the edge off a little bit, like we're really tight, if we had this extra bit of money, and we just wanted to be able to give that back to other people. I have a very difficult, my toxic trait is that I cannot ask for help from people.
Mhm.
But I am so good at strategizing on how to help other people, and I will be the first person to do that. This kind of has been a long time coming and the stars just kind of aligned because I vividly remember, sitting in my child's hospital room after, he went back into the hospital at about 5 months because he had a respiratory arrest. And we were there for about 30 days. And our village came out in, you know, so strong. I wasn't getting paid because I had exhausted my maternity leave. My husband was still commuting 2+ hours back and forth to work while he was in the hospital. And
Mm.
And they showed up for us in ways that I could not even dream of. And I remember just thinking, like, we're going to figure out how to give this back to people. So, fast forward a couple years later, pivoting back to Bo, and the sweet little kind soul that he is, he's like, what if we open something to help other kids, because we have been fortunate to be recipients of a couple of grants here and there. We've, done the intensive therapies. We've got the adaptive bike. We've, thankfully I have pretty good insurance and we've been able to get a lot of the things that we have
Yeah.
needed. I'm super thankful that I have a good job. My husband has a good job, but not everybody has that. And not everybody has access to these things. So our goal was just to create something where we could just help people out a little bit, give back to our community, give back to people in this community. And, my love language is acts of service. I love giving back to people. I want to instill that value in my children. It's just something that we felt like we needed to do. I think if you put good in the world, it's going to come back to you in one way or another. Still out here fighting for my kid, but I'm going to help you fight for yours too. I'll be a part of your village. My board on Wolf Pups is incredible. They hustle and grind just as hard as I do, and I love them for that. But like I said, we're a small startup. We're just getting started. We've been up for, I guess, 3 months now. We've made a good, a good start, but still have a long way to go. Hopefully we'll get to where we need to be. But in the meantime, we're just out there hustling and grinding and trying to raise funds for kids that need it.
Two things I want to touch on. One that I think is so important, that I think is often missed. Against ignorance is bliss. I don't think people realize just how expensive
Things
it
are,
is to have a child with a disability.
yeah, so
And
expensive.
and I mean that, like, from a perspective of you and your husband have good jobs,
Yep. And I still
and
can't afford
you
all
would be
this.
amazed how expensive it is
Yep.
if you have a child who needs these types of equipment, these therapies. Because again, the goal is that they grow and they develop, which means you're kind of chronically needing
You're
more
chronically needing
things.
new things. Yep.
And so I think an observation I have is people are very quick to dismiss the financial overwhelm,
Mhm.
even from families that they perceive to be middle to upper middle class. Oh, they'll be fine. They have good jobs.
Yep.
Woo! If they only knew.
If you only knew what we sacrificed, if you only knew what we go without, and trust me, like I recognize how privileged I am. I don't want that to be lost on anyone, but it's expensive, man. It's
It's expensive, and what you just mentioned, I think, is also, again, lost, especially if you have seasons where you're in a hospital or an emergency incident, and now if you come from a dual income family, and now the mom or the dad is taking time off, and you're losing that income stream. I mean, parents, caregivers, they're making very difficult decisions
Yep.
to keep life moving while also making potentially financial sacrifices that
Mhm.
reduce their capability, their own independent capability. And so, again, part of what I love about what y'all are doing is it's taking the edge off. I'm taking the words out of your mouth. It's not that these grants are going to solve everything for these families. It
Certainly
won't,
not.
because
Or
it, and I think it's just a wonderful reminder for the people that love a family that has a child with a disability that money is always a conversation.
yeah. There's not a day that goes by when we're not like, "How are we gonna pay for that?"
And the other thing I want to touch on, Brittany, that you mentioned, and you packaged it in a way that I think is really beautiful. Effectively, what you're saying is support is contagious.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that that's a really beautiful kind of like theme. It's like you admit that, like, it's hard to ask for help, but guess what? Supporting people doesn't require asking.
Yeah.
It's just it requires doing.
Yep.
And it's not that you needed it per se, although it sounds like it was super helpful. It's what it does is it inspires. Once you're the recipient of that support, all you want to do is give it back to others.
Yes, absolutely. For sure.
And I think that, to me, like, that's the theme of what you've built.
Yeah.
Is as a result of being a recipient of support, now you wanna be in a position to help others, and as a result of the support that someone else receives, they will pay it forward in their own way. And maybe it doesn't look like a nonprofit, but maybe it looks something like it looks a little different for everyone, and I think that support contagion is just, like, very, very beautiful, and emblematic of like the types of villages that we all want to be a part of.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to build. We say we're trying to build a wolf pack, our village of, people that are just going to rise and lift up other people in this space. One thing I would just want people to remember is, donate to these things when they're about. It doesn't have to be wolf pups, but there's plenty of other small nonprofits out there. And trust me, a lot of them are small. They're people just like us who are just trying to put a little good in the world. Donate to them, and maybe it won't go to your kid or, the kid that has a disability, but it's going to go to a kid. And if we collectively lift up our community, we can show people that we are a voice of our own, and we can lift each other up. And not that we won't other welcome the support from other places, but if just for perspective, I think last week we got over $400,000 in grant requests, and
Wow.
I was just like blown away. And I was like, this is just a testament to how few resources there are in this community for
Yeah.
people. And
Yeah.
it's just, there's only so much, and there's way more need out there than what's coming in. So, that's what we want to do. We want to lift up our community. We want to inspire people to lift up kids in this space. If we give them the tools to thrive now, you know, only good things to come in the future. I think one thing that is really important for people to remember too is these tools and resources aren't just tools and resources for right now. If you keep kids healthy when they're younger, and give them these things that they need to thrive when they're younger, they're gonna thrive when they're older too, and they're gonna stay
Mhm.
healthier when they're older. We
Yeah.
we know that of normal, typical people. If you do the things you're supposed to do when you're younger, you exercise, you eat well, you do, all the things you're supposed to do, you're gonna have longevity. And I think that that's an important thing to remember for people too, is that this doesn't just help now and in the moment. This helps 10 years down the line because they have more endurance. They're stronger. Those hours they spent pedaling their bike up and down the road makes a difference 10 years from now. I think that's important too. And that's just me coming from healthcare background and knowing what it looks like later on when we don't invest time in ourselves and our health, when we can.
Yeah. I love it, Brittany. Where can people go to support your work? Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook. Facebook, Wolf Pups on Wheels. Our website's www.wolfpupsonwheels.org. Check us out. We'd love to hear from you. Contact us if, we're open to any and all. Like I said, we're a startup. We're just trying to get our name out there. And, we hope that we can build this thing as big as we can and help out as many families and kids as we can, because they all very much deserve it.
Yeah. Brittany, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited for our listeners to learn more about your organization, more about your story, and I look forward to finding all the ways to partner to help more of these families and these communities.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.